Hello there everyone, this is Lydia from Altenew, and today we're going to be taking a closer look at the Sweet Flowers stamp set in our October release. Now this one has an outline as well as some images that fit within the stamp, as well as some beautiful sentiments too. If you turn the stamp set over, you can see that we do have the guideline on how to pop this image together on the back, so it's easy to do. So I'm going to keep this off to the side. It's always helpful to have it off to the side if you are stamping it for the first time. And I always recommend, if it does have an outline, if a layering stamp does have an outline, to use this first. So I've popped my outline onto an acrylic block. You can use a stamping tool if you wish. I just am a little bit old school. So I'm going to be stamping onto some white cardstock. On this one, I'm going to be using some Obsidian Pigment Black ink. Now this is my favorite ink to use for stamping outlines. It stamps really bold and black. It dries pretty quickly, and also it gets that really fine detail too. So the card that I'm stamping onto is just a piece of white cardstock. So it's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So this is going to go directly onto the front of an A2 card base. So I'm going to stamp my image into place. I've covered it all with that beautiful ink, and now I'm just going to make sure that I have even pressure all over the stamp to make sure it stamps perfectly onto my card. So once I've finished the first one, I'm then going to stamp this again, and I'm going to kind of intertwine them, so kind of like they're hugging each other. So as before, I'm going to use that same ink up all of the stamp, make sure that you have everywhere covered, and then pop it into place. When stamping a large image like this with an acrylic block, you're going to want to keep at least one hand in position all of the time. So make sure it doesn't move or rock or bow or anything like that. You're also going to want to use an acrylic block that's the right size for your stamp. So the smaller the acrylic block that you can fit on your stamp onto, the better. So once that is done, I then have my arrangement all figured out, and I'm ready to move on to the layers. Now on this stamp set, we do have letters on here. So it's going to tell you which ones go with which. So we have A, B, and C on here. And then we also have A2 and A1, which go into the first flower. Then B1 and B2 that go into the second, and C1 and C2, which go into the third. So it's nicely labeled so you know which ones are going to go with where. As these stamps are high quality photopolymer, you can see just how well they do grip to the acrylic block straight off. So first off, I am going to be using crimson ink for the base of all of the flowers. I did kind of want to go for a Christmassy theme, but at the end I don't think that maybe they do cut the mustard for this, but if you wanted to, you could definitely send them as holiday cards. So this is the crimson, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the A1 and I'm going to stamp that into position on the A flower. So this is just going to go within those outlines. I'm then going to take B1. Now this one has like a little gap in it here, and that is so the stem is not stamped. So the stem is going to be over this flower. It's a really great design that way. Again, as before, I'm going to be using the crimson ink. And to line this one up, I am going to be using that little gap that we have in the petal on that little stem there, so it stamps in perfectly. Just make sure that you have everything else in as well. Also, if you don't get these stamped perfectly, I think it's just fine. I don't believe that anyone is going to call you out on getting them slightly off, and even if they do, you could say, you know, that's the look I was going for. So I'm just going to stamp this second flower again into place. Again, I've used that little gap in the design just to make sure that everything was perfectly in place. I can then move on to C1, pop that on my block, and then ink that up again with the crimson ink. So this is really great ink to use for your photopolymer stamps as well. It sits pretty good on there and stamps really, really nice and smooth. The ink was formulated to use with photopolymer stamps and also solid stamps as well. So this is why it works really well. So I'm just going to finish off this little arrangement we have with the last layer of the last layer of the flowers. So I'm going to stamp that one into place, and then I can move on to the second layer of the flowers. So I'm going to start off with the A2 this time, and for this one I'm going to go with a darker ink, and this one is the Velvet. So this is in the same colour family as the crimson, so it's going to make a really great effect and great look, so you don't really need to think about which colours to use because they're already in the same colour family. So I'm going to stamp this into place. As before, this is going to leave a great impression. You want to look towards the layering guide to see where this is going to go, but it is kind of towards the base of the petal to give it that extra shading there. I'm then going to move on to B2, and the same as before, I'm going to be using the Velvet ink. Now, when I stamped this one this time, the ink wasn't sitting great in this little patch here. It was kind of bubbling. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clean that off, and I'm then going to take an eraser. So this is a normal eraser. Any kind of eraser that you do have will do. I do find that a white one works best for some strange reason. But then I am going to just add this eraser all over that photopolymer stamp, and that's going to kind of clean it. So if you do have any embossing powder on there and maybe a little bit of grease, that may be the problem why your ink isn't sitting correctly on your stamps. So now, as you can see, that eraser's done its job, and I can then ink this up and then pop this into place. So this one here is going to add the depth and shade and the little veins on the petals on this bee flower that we have here. So again, ink this one up, and then we can pop that into place. You can see that it's stamping perfectly now, and I don't need to use that eraser trick every time that I do use the stamp. It's just when it's the ink's bubbling and the ink and the stamps are not friends. So I'm then going to move on to the C. Now this one, it was perfectly fine. I didn't need to use the eraser anymore. It was just that one little spot that I may have popped my finger on, but everything was good. Everything's fine. So for these C ones, again, I'm going to be using the same ink. So this is the Velvet, and then just popping them into place. I am using my little guide that I have to the left of me, just to make sure that I am getting these in the right place too. So I'm then going to move on to the stem, because all my flowers are done. Now, as you can see, there's a pretty bendy stamp. My way to get this perfect to stamp in here in the right position is to pop that back onto the stamp just on the other side. So this is the side that you do see, and that is going to kind of cling to that. You can see exactly where it's going to be. You can then pick up your stamp with an acrylic block, and it's going to be in the right shape for you to stamp perfectly within those little stems that we have there. So for this one, I'm going to be using the olive ink. This is a really great green. It's one of my favorites. I keep going back to it again and again. I just think it's the perfect color for stem images, especially if you want them to be a little bit more vibrant. So I'm just going to pop this into place, and you can see that this is just going to go within the outlines of those stems and those little bottoms of the buds that we have as well. So again, as I said before, we're just going to be using that olive just to finish off the other stem on the other side as well. So everything we do on one, we'll be doing exactly the same on the other. So once I have this one in place, I can then move on to the second layer of the stems. Now I'm going to do exactly the same trick that I did for this piece. So I'm going to take the image off the carrier sheet, and then going to remove it and then add it onto the top of the carrier sheet. So that's going to make sure that all of these little pieces are in the right place for stamping. Sometimes they can get a little bit bent if you just put it on the block by itself, but I find that this way is it's user friendly and it works pretty well too. So I'm then going to take the moss ink. This is a darker green than the olive, so more of a darker tone, but in the same color family. And again, I'm just going to pop this into place. It's going to add darker pieces to where it would be in real life, I believe. It looks really realistic. I just love Altenew flowers, especially the ones that are really easy to layer. Now, these only have 2 layers for each, the flowers and the leaves and the stems. So it's a really great and easy one to start with if you are just starting out on the layering stamping. So once I have that done, I then, as I said before, I did want this to have kind of a holiday theme. So I'm going to go with the Season's Greetings from the Holiday Flower stamp set. Now, as you can see, I've left all my sentiments on my little carrier sheet, and I've just kind of used that as a guide to see which one's going to fit best over here. So I'm going to go with the Season's Greetings. I've added this onto my block already, and I'm just going to stamp that up using my favorite obsidian ink, so making sure that it's nicely covered. Also, I can use the grid lines that are on the acrylic block and my cutting mat behind me to make sure that this is nice and straight before stamping. I then did want to make it a little bit more holiday, and what's more holiday than a little bit of sparkle and shine. Now I'm going to be using the Antique Gold spray from Altenew, but I don't want to add any splatter over my sentiment, so I'm going to take my sentiment, Make sure it's nice and clean and dry. Pop that in place over the sentiment that I've just stamped, and this is going to act as a mask without having to actually mask it off, and it's going to be the perfect size too. So I'm just going to remove the nozzle out of my spray and just tap the top, and that is going to add a really great gold splatter to the design. So once that is done, I can then remove our little mask stamp that we have there at the minute. If you do have any splatter on there, you can just clean that off and then it's good to go. But it also means that we've masked off this sentiment and it's not going to be splattered, so it's going to be easily readable that way. I can then take a card base, so this is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm just going to add my little panel that we've just created onto that. It's a great one layer card, so it's, again, this is going to be really great for postage. So I'm just going to pop that down, making sure that I don't smudge any of those little drops that we've just popped on there. So there is the first project completed for today. So we're going to move on to the second one. We're going to be using exactly the same stamp set. We're just going to be using the outline image on this one. I have a piece of watercolor cardstock. This is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. As we're going to be adding some embossing onto this, I'm using some anti-static powder. I use baby powder, but you can use all different types of things. Talc and cornstarch work just fine too. You can also see that I do add it to my hands. I do feel that this helps me not add any fingerprints where I don't want them. So I'm taking that outline again from the Sweet Flowers stamp set, and as we are going to be embossing the image from here, I am using an embossing ink. So an embossing ink is normally clear and it's really sticky, so that means that the embossing powder that we place over it is going to stick to the image. So that's what you need to look for when you're looking for an embossing ink. Make sure it's nice and sticky, and a clear one always works best, especially if you are going to use clear embossing powder. So I'm just stamped that into position, and I'm then going to be using some rose gold embossing ink from Altenew. So I have my image stamped. It's really hard to see at the minute because it's white on white. But then once we pop this embossing powder over, you're going to be able to see the image. You can see that I have a piece of scrap paper under me. This is going to catch any of that straight embossing powder, and I can pop it back into the pot, so I'm not going to waste anything. So when you have your heat tool, you are going to want to make sure it heats up for at least a minute to make sure that the air that's coming out of it is at optimum temperature. So once I've done that, I can then hold it about 6 inches away, and then I can heat my little image that we have here. It may take a little while to start, but as soon as that embossing has started going, you can then kind of chase it around. So what it's going to do is the heat is going to melt that embossing powder. It's kind of a plasticky kind of thing. And once that embossing powder has heated up, and then it's set, so it's going to get nice and hard and make it very, very shiny as well. It's also going to leave a raised edge, so it's really great for watercoloring, which we're going to be doing with this image. So once that has all nicely been melted, I can then stamp my other one. I am going to use the same layout as the card before. So I'm going to ink up my image again using the embossing ink, and then kind of tuck this into the other image that we have up there, and then press down nice and firmly. You want to make sure that the embossing ink has all been transferred to the paper and it's not on your stamp then. I can then bring in my piece of scrap paper that I used before. You can see that I haven't popped my embossing powder back in just yet, and then can then add more over the top. It's always best to add more than you think you're going to need, because then you can just pop it back in the pot later on once it's off the scrap paper as well. So it's only going to take as much as it needs. I can then take my heat tool again and then emboss this. Now I do find that the second images always seem to emboss better than the first. And it takes less time too for some strange reason. Okay, so once I have my images in place, I then decided to pop my sentiment on. So the reason being I'm doing this now is because I am heat embossing it, and I'm also watercoloring. If I left it till after I'd watercolored, I'd had to make sure that everything was really, really bone dry before I did my embossed sentiment. So that's why I'm doing it now. So I've popped the sentiment on. This is from the Holiday Flower stamp set, and this one it says peace, love and joy. And I'm going to pop that into place into the corner. So I haven't gone in exactly the same place as the sentiment in the other one. I'm using the embossing ink to stamp the sentiment, adding some more of that beautiful rose gold embossing powder, and then heat setting to make sure it doesn't move anywhere. Once it's heat set, that is going to be there permanently and forever. So I'm going to just take my heat tool and heat set that one, and then there is all of the stamping completed on the card. So I'm now going to set up my area for watercolouring. So I have my watercolour pan set from Altenew. This is a really great watercolour set. It's got 24 different colours in it, and they're all really great quality. I then have the piece that we're going to be watercolouring onto. I have a piece of kitchen roll here, and also my water as well as my paintbrush. So this is a great way to set your area up so everything's in place. I am going to be doing a little bit of colour mixing, so I'm just taking a piece of watercolour cardstock. This is just a scrap piece that I had lying around, so I can test the colours that I do mix onto this before I kind of commit to popping them onto my project. So I'm using two of the different reds from the set. I'm using the Cherry Blossom and also the Tea Party, and I'm just going to mix those together. Looking back on it now, I could have made it a little bit more red rather than the pinky tone that we have going on at the minute, and it may have been a little bit more holiday-ish than it does end up at the end, but never mind. I'm then going to take a green, so this is the Tropical Forest Green, and I'm going to add that onto my little mixing palette on the side. And you can see that it's very, very yellow. So to tone this down, I'm just going to take a little bit of the brown that we have in the little set here. I'm just going to take a little touch of that and then add that into the green. That's going to kind of take the colour tone down a little bit, make it be not as bright as it is. So you can see there that it's got more of a browny, warmish tone on the bottom there. So once I'm happy with my colours, I can then move this off to the side and then start with the colouring onto the panel. So I'm going to be doing a really quick watercolour technique on here because, you know, if you are batch making cards, you want things to not be too time consuming. So I'm just going to add some clean clear water over my little floral image there. So once I've done that, I can then take that colour that we've mixed and just drop that in to where it would be the darkest. So this is going to be at the base of the petals or where petals overlap each other. And you can see because we have that clean clear water down there, it's kind of doing the blending on its own. Once I did that, I then decided to add a little bit more red into my little colour that we have there so it wasn't so pinky. And I'm then going to add this over the pink. And I didn't want this to go as far as the pink did. So it's going to get more shadows, more depth, more interest to the little image that we have. So as you can see, I mixed a little bit more pink into there so I could keep the pink going on at the first layer of the flower and then the red as the second layer. So I'm going to keep going with my images, just doing exactly the same as I did for the first flower that we have there. So I'm just going to add some clean clear water, drop in that pinky tone that we have. The water is going to take that, do what it wants with it. And I do love the effect of watercolor because it's so natural. You don't really have that much control over it other than where you put your water down. It's not really going to go any further than that. Especially as we have that embossing there too, that's going to kind of capture that water, so it's not going to go over the edges. Watercoloring can be so relaxing and therapeutic. I think the main difficulty with maybe doing watercolor is to let go. You need to not have control of everything you do. The water is going to do most of the work for you, so you don't need to worry too much about it. So just keep going with the image by popping your water down first and then just dabbing and dotting that colour in where you think it's going to be the darkest. Once I've added the pink, I can then move on to the red just to add some greater depth to that image that we have there. I'm just going to keep going with the rest of the flowers. Now I got this one a little bit wrong. I did colour with the water over the bit that's supposed to be the stem. So all I did was I just wiped that away, but because we have that embossed line, I didn't need to worry about it. If the embossed line wasn't there, it would have ran over, the pink would have ran over into that stem image, but because the embossed line was there, it kind of protected me. and give me a little bit of a safety net. So if you are starting out with watercoloring, it might be a good idea to use the embossing technique just to give you a little bit of a safety net when you do start out. Also, when you are starting out with watercoloring, it is a good idea to maybe think of each image as a little tiny part. You don't need to worry about coloring the whole image. If you just take a flower a petal at a time, that flower will grow before your very eyes. And watercoloring is so pretty as well. And even if you do go a little bit messy, you can always say that was the look you were going for. You were going for some loose watercolored flowers anyway, right? So I'm just going to keep going with this, and as you can see, I'm nearly finished all of the flowers. I just have one just left here on the left. So quickly just going to add some of my clean clear water over there. Grab some of that pink. If you do want a lighter shade, you can just add more water into that colour, and that's going to give it a really lighter look. And then more pigment is going to make it darker. Add the red in, and then we have finished with the flowers. You are then going to want to clean off your brush really well. So that's why I have that little piece of tissue off to the side. So if I have any water that's too much on my brush, I just wipe it on there, and it really does make a huge difference just to have it there. Sometimes you need it, sometimes you don't, but it's always best to have something and not need it, and then need something and not have it. Okay, so I'm going to keep going with my little stems here. So as you can see, I'm adding more of a green tone to these ones than I did with the pure clean water with the petals. So I'm kind of mixing that we have with lots of water and adding that as the base rather than the clean clear water. I can then add in some darker tones to where I think it's going to be the darkest. I did decide to add a little bit more of a green tone to this. I thought it was a bit too yellowy when I popped it down, but you can always add into different colors to create more different shades. And I think that's a really fun way about using watercolors. You may end up having a set that has 12 colors in it, but the more you mix them together, you're going to create various different tones and various different colors. So it's kind of endless that way, because all colors are really made from yellow and red and blue. So yeah, you can have a whole array of rainbow colors that way. So I'm going to keep going until all of this is complete. I then decided I wanted that image to pop a little bit more. I wanted a little bit of a background. So what I'm going to do is I have cleaned off my brush. So I now just have some clean, clear water. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to go around the outside edge of the flowers that we have. Because we have that embossed line there, it's really going to help us not pull the colour out from the flowers and the stems that we've already painted. And I'm then going to take a really dark blue and I'm just going to dab this in. So I'm dabbing it right close to the outside line from the flowers, but because of the amount of water that we have there, it's really going to pull this out and make it a lot lighter than it really is. So as you can see, I'm adding the clean water down, adding that colour in, and then kind of pulling it out a little bit more with some more water. I didn't want it too dark, but I kind of wanted it to not be the same all the way around. So more of a natural looking sky, maybe a little bit cloudy on a nice summer's day. So I'm going to keep going with this. I will speed this little bit up because it may get a little bit boring, me chatting away all the time. So I'm just going to keep going with this, adding some more water down around the edges, doing it little by little, then dropping in the blues, pulling that out a little bit more, then going again until I've completed around the whole of the image. As you can see, we're getting really close to the end now. So lots of water has been used on this, and you can see that we are using that watercolor cardstock from Altenew, and it hasn't bent and bowed. Even the amount of water that we are popping down, this watercolor cardstock is taking it. So the watercolor cardstock that I am using is the 50% cotton one, and these ones are already cut to size. So if you are a little bit of a lazy crafter like me and you want your card panels cut to size, this might be a great one to go for. So very nearly there now, all that water's down, just adding some of those really beautiful blue colours in there. So this is the Galactic Stream Blue from the watercolour pen set. I'm pulling that out again with my paintbrush. So once this has all been done, I'm then going to leave my panel to dry. I do find it's better to let it dry naturally so it dries nice and flat. So once I have that done, I'm then going to take the sentiment, pop it back into the sentiment that we've already stamped, and then add some more of that splatter like we did for the first card. So make sure it's nicely shook up so all that mica is moved around in the liquid that we have in there, and then we're going to get a nice shimmery gold spray splatter to this card. Just going to pop that the lid back on. You are going to want to make sure you do that because I have spilt some of mine before. So remove the little sentiment mask that we have, and then we can add our panel onto a card base. Again, this is a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 card base. And I'm just popping that into place, making sure that I don't put my fingers in that wet splatter that we have going on. So here is the second card complete. And I do feel that this has a more of a softer, maybe more of a summer feel than the first card. So the first card can definitely be used for your holiday greetings. The second one, maybe not so much, but I think that if you have a non-traditional Christmas card idea going on, it would work perfectly fine. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. I really do hope that you've enjoyed the video, and I also hope it's inspired you to grab out your crafty supplies and make something beautiful. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and we'll see you again really, really soon. Bye-bye.